This is episode number 24. Welcome to the Organic Crumbs podcast. Today's show is a chew on this episode, and the topic is, are you listening? To tell you all about it, here's your host, holistic nutritionist and founder of Organic Crumbs, Tami Chu.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast today. Thank you for taking the time and spending it with me. Today is going to be kind of interesting because as I sit here and look out the window at the pouring rain, we do have this kind of steady rain sound in the background. I have Lake Chew building up again in my backyard. The chickens are all huddled under some form of protection from the rain and the wind. And so if you hear that in the background, that's what that is. Today's also interesting because we just finished up with the inauguration of the new president and the Worldwide Women's March, and there's lots of pictures of that all over the place. And today's topic is related in that all the change that we want to see in the world still has to start at home. It still has to start with your own self, your own behavior. And however you feel, whatever you feel about the president or the march or any of the other political mess that is dominating the news feeds currently, we are still the only thing that we can control or change. And so we must be the change that we want to see. And that always starts at home. So today we are talking about something that you've heard me say. If you've ever listened to me before, you've heard me say it. I say it to everyone and everything that I can have the opportunity to say it to. Listening to our bodies, listening to ourselves. And honestly, that begins with love, and it begins with loving ourselves. And this is a really gigantic topic that I'm going to try and narrow down a little bit because I know that it's something that we could talk about for hours, and that's not going to happen. But so many men and women today from all walks of life are not happy with themselves. And particularly, we're going to start with our bodies and talk about ourselves too, but in particularly our bodies. And when we're looking at statistics, we have a lot more statistics or higher numbers of statistics for women. And you'll see that a lot of that is because women are really targeted in terms of physical looks and physical presentation a lot more than men. Makeup, clothes, all that stuff is really, really targeted to women. So the numbers for women are higher, but it's not something that men are immune from. It's not something that men don't have issue with. So we're going to talk about it all. So the number one wish for most girls ages 11 to 17, and these are the ages of my children, my nieces and nephews. This is crazy. The number one wish for most girls age 11 to 17 is to be thinner. Eating disorders, particularly those related to body image, are on the rise in every population, not just 11 to 17-year-olds. And it is currently affecting over 10 million women and 1 million men in the U.S. alone. And these are just numbers that have been documented. These are people who have diagnosed eating disorders who have potentially sought treatment. So again, we've talked about this before. Things that are documented are a representation, but definitely not representative of the real, true numbers. So just the fact that it's affecting that many people documented means that it's a much bigger problem than we know, than we've perhaps really realized. Now, since the 60s, the body type that we're exposed to in the mainstream media and advertisement is unnaturally thin. And I'm not saying this to disparage thinness because, some body types are just naturally thin, but because the images that we see and that are presented are airbrushed and photoshopped to be smoother less blemished, thinner, bustier, have more thigh gap. And let me tell you, thigh gap is a real thing that's happening today. And if you don't believe me, you go to Instagram and search the hashtag thigh gap, and you will be shocked at some of the things that you see. It's photoshopped to have more ribs showing, plumper bottoms with, less everywhere else than any natural woman can have. These are not things that come naturally in the human form. So we are standing against this gigantic wave of industry imagery that's the result of billions upon billions of dollars and a great amount of market research that is specifically geared to tell us how to think and what to believe. But you and I, we're smarter than that, right? We don't have those same issues. We're not gonna believe things about ourselves or our own bodies based on what we see, right? Well, so there was a researcher from Northwestern, which is a pretty, predominant college, and she decided, she's pretty young, she's a teacher, but she's definitely a researcher. She decided to take on this subject as a study, particularly because she was absolutely sure that smart, successful women, and this was a study on women, it did not include men, but this was a study on women. And so she was absolutely convinced that smart, successful women were not going to be prone to the body shaming that comes with this overexposure to this kind of idealized imagery. And unfortunately, she actually proved herself wrong. What she found was that in spite of these really intelligent college-aged women knowing that these images that they're viewing are not true to life, and even commenting on them, like they would say, oh, this girl is clearly photoshopped. That's not a real image. That's not real to life. Clearly, they airbrushed her thighs or her stomach or whatever it was. They were remarking on it. And even after remarking on the unrealistic pictures, they almost immediately, and this is most of them, and I don't have the percentage in front of me, but most of the women who looked at these pictures almost immediately made social comparisons to their own bodies in derogatory ways. Like, I could never look like that. Well, maybe if I went on a super diet for 6 months before summer, I could maybe look like that. I wonder if I could get my body to look the same as hers, even though we know that that's not a true image of a true person. This researcher, Renee Engeln, calls it beauty sickness. And I actually love that term because I think it's very descriptive. And beauty sickness is when a woman or a man actually knows better, but it isn't enough. That knowledge is not enough to change her mindset. And that mindset interferes with her ability to openly engage with the world because she sees herself as not living up to those images. It prevents her, it blocks her from being able to openly engage with the world. In fact, there are some evolutionary scientists who are comparing the exposure to these photoshopped images to sugar in our current society. So a little bit of exposure isn't too bad. It's not really going to change the way you live. It's not going to change how you think or how you feel. But the inundation and the oversaturation of these wrong kinds of images can be just as damaging as too much of the wrong kind of sugar. And there are tons of studies, and I'm pretty sure that I've talked to you about this before, about the research that shows that sugar leads to inflammation and sugar can lead to all of these other difficulties in your body. Overexposure and inundation. A little bit goes a long way, right? So here's the thing. It really is about exposure. There was another study recently in 2016, again on body image, that showed that our preference for certain body types can change based on what we see. Now, this experiment, researchers were trying to determine why certain cultures have different body type preferences. Some cultures see someone who is very curvaceous as a preferred body type. Some, like our culture currently, while the standard is changing some, I mean, strong is the new thin and strong is beautiful, all of these kinds of things that are, shifting the ideal for women just a little bit. The exposure that we still have in all of these areas is still very much the ultra unnaturally thin body type. But in other cultures, that's not necessarily the same thing. So what they did in this study was they had several pictures of various body types, some thin, some unnaturally thin, some naturally thin, and some very curvy, some fluffy, different, all kinds of different body types. Both glamorous pictures where they were dressed up and makeup and beautifully glammed, and then also plainly clad. So I think the pictures that I was looking at were like a tan or gray leotard and tights. So it was very, very plain, nothing fancy, no makeup, hair in ponytails or hair straight down, nothing exciting. And they showed these pictures to a varied group of women. And what they found was that the more a certain kind of body was seen, regardless of the size or shape, the higher the preference for that particular body type. In other words, our view of beauty in a body changes based on what we see regularly. Now think about what this means for our young men and women looking at popular magazines or watching commercials or seeing these constant billboards with Victoria's Secret models, or, their constant exposure to ads on their Facebook feed or their every website that they go to, and all of these images that they're being inundated with. Whether they know the pictures are real or not is not going to change the perception that this is what beauty looks like, that this is normal. And this includes all of the shows that they're watching, all of their, for the young people, all of the teenage shows that show all these perfect bodied young women and men. And this is what is normal. This is what is normal. And so when girls and boys see these pictures and then see themselves, and this goes for adults too, they do not see beauty, they see flaws. They see themselves as not being normal, as not being perfect. And so what they see is not beauty. Now, numbers are another issue that comes up with body image all the time. I did a survey last year, and it is so weird to say last year when it's just barely the beginning of 2017. But I did a survey in 2016 asking people first if they had an ideal weight, quote unquote ideal, and second, if they were at that weight. Now, apparently, if you ask this question on Facebook, you get some pretty incredulous responses before the beauty of vulnerability comes through. People can't believe that you're asking this. Why are you asking this in a public forum? Now, mostly women answered, though men were much more likely to answer honestly if the question was asked in person. So if I was talking to someone and asked them these questions, they would answer pretty honestly. But if it was on Facebook, there was some mockery and some jokes and, things like this. So when they were in person, they were more likely to respond. Some women were immediately vulnerable and shared their numbers openly, and others shared via private message or text. It was interesting that so many women were willing to respond, though, and I loved that. Now, there were a few things that I noticed that were super fascinating to me. First, more women than I expected said that they no longer looked at the number on the scale and just go more by what they feel like at a certain weight, which I think is actually fabulous because that's not the norm. And we are so fascinated by numbers, and we're so, sometimes we're inundated with numbers. And so there is this kind of connection to the ideal weight or what we should be. Now, even though a lot of these women said that they didn't look at the number on the scale, most of them still had a number that they considered an ideal weight. And all but 3 of the women that responded were not at their ideal weight. And these numbers varied from 120 to 160 pounds. And most, from a chart perspective, like if you're looking at a doctor's chart, were not unreasonable goal weights. Across the board, though, every single person, even those who were already at their ideal weight, had something about their bodies that they would like to change. Even if it was something really small, like, if I could just firm up here, just a little bit here, I'd like to be stronger here. And, those aren't terrible goals. It's just the fact that there was not one person of everyone that was surveyed that was perfectly happy and satisfied with where they were. Now, from a young age, we're taught about weight and what an ideal number might be for us. And some women that I talked to had a number that was straight from a chart from the doctor's office that maybe they had never actually attained. But the majority of us, the number was related to a time in their life when they weighed that number and felt beautiful or powerful or strong or capable or thin or healthy. I have a number. And my own number, and I'm not at that number currently, and my own number is from when I was first getting married and starting a new career, and I was just generally young and strong and healthy, and I felt good. I felt good all the time. And what happens is we associate how we felt at that time with the number that we saw on the scale. And it's actually really similar to when we're listening to music and we have emotional memory attached to a song. And there are studies about this. This is not some random thing I'm making up. It's very interesting. And when you listen to certain music, like I'm a little bit older, and so when I listen to music from the 80s and the 90s, I have emotional memories that are attached to those songs that was where I was when they came out. And so there are certain songs that I listen to at certain points in my life, and when I hear them again, I'm taken back to that emotion. And sometimes it's not even the memory that I'm taken back to, it's just the emotion that I felt at that time. So sometimes you hear a song and you're like, why do I feel so happy when I hear this song? Or why does this song make me feel so sad or lonely or whatever? And it's because we have these emotional memories that are actually attached to the song. And if you actually let yourself go a little bit deeper, you might remember what was happening when that song came out. And as a sidebar, when, some of the celebrities that we lost, this is that attachment. It's the emotional memories that are attached to the celebrity or the singer who performed or who we saw at a particular time in our lives. So we have this same emotional memory attached when we see this number on the scale and what we felt like when we saw these certain numbers. And the problem is that this memory, this desire to have the body that we once had, actually puts us at odds with the body that we're currently living with, the body that has carried us to where we are now. And the thing is, it's not a different body. It's the same body. And it's fearfully and wonderfully made. And remember, too, that each thing that you see as a blemish on your body is actually a mark of what you've come through in your life. Each of those memories has added to the whole of who you are today. I mean, a lot of people look back and they have regrets about their life and what they've been through. And it's okay to regret that you didn't make better choices at some point or another. But at some point you have to come to a place where you're like, you know what? I am who I am today because of what I've been through in the past. And while I would have liked to have made better choices so that maybe I would be at a better place right now, or maybe I would be further along in my maturity journey or whatever, it still has brought me to where I am today. And my journey is exactly that. It's a journey. It's not a stopping point. I haven't stopped at any of those places. So each of those memories has added to who you are, the whole of who you are. My body, I have stretchy skin on my stomach, and I have leftover stretch marks on my thighs. And those are a testimony to the 4 beautiful children that I carried there. And I wouldn't trade them for the smooth skin of youth or even take away their mark on my body. I have a scar on my back from a surgery, and it's a reminder of the years of nearly debilitating chronic pain that built my appreciation for walking and playing and gave me empathy for other people who are suffering physically that I might not have if I hadn't had that chronic pain, that debilitating pain. And, I have a lot more gray hairs than I used to. And I can even attribute each of my gray hairs to a worry or concern or, feeling or prayer for my children or my siblings or those people that I love. And, each of the lines around my eyes, that is a testimony to the great laughter that I've had in my life. Being beautiful is something you get to choose. And I choose to be beautiful, no matter what size my body currently happens to be. So, I came from church culture. I grew up in the church, not the Catholic Church, but I grew up in the church. And there's a Bible verse that tells us to love our neighbors as ourselves. And it's kind of interesting because those of us who did grow up in church culture don't really think about that much. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's just one of the, things that we're told. That's what you're supposed to do. Well, if you don't love yourself, and that includes the body that you're in, how can you love other people? How can you love your neighbor, right? How can you love other people if you don't even love yourself? And actually, let's just talk about that for a minute because there's this idea of being in relationship with yourself, right? There's this idea of being in relationship. And so when we're talking about relationship, when we're looking at relationship with another person, so figure your significant other or your children or your parents or your best friend. I mean, these are all the relationships that are really important to us that we have. And so what does a relationship with one of these people that you love look like? How do you talk to your loved one? Do you constantly barrage them with negativity? Do you tell them how awful they are? Do you tell them, the things that they're doing wrong? Do you tell them the problems that they have with their bodies? Do you tell them the issues you have with how they treat other people or you or themselves? How is the conversation with, generally speaking, with these loved ones? How much time do you spend with them? When you spend time with them, are you on the phone or reading or ignoring them, generally speaking? Do you, how do you, spend time feeding these people that you love, particularly your children or your spouse, or even, if you have elderly parents, if you're taking care of them, how are you feeding them? Are you concerned with what goes into their mouth? Are you concerned with, how healthy they are? Or are you constantly just here, here's some sugar, shut up. What kind of relationship do you have with other people? And then if you turn that around on yourself, what does that relationship look like when it's with yourself? How do you talk to yourself? Are you constantly telling yourself that you are not worthy, that you are not beautiful, that you have all of these flaws, that you have all of these issues, that you have all of these problems, and that you suck, that you're not nice, that you are a terrible parent, that you are a terrible child, that you are a terrible friend? Is this the self-talk that you have? And if it is this the kind of relationship that you want to be in? Because remember, there is only one person on this earth that you are in relationship with from the time that you are born until the time that you are dead. And that's you. And if you are in a relationship with someone from the time that you are born until the time that you are dead, who speaks to you with abusive language, how can you be open to the rest of the world? How can you walk forward in love and peace and kindness and gratitude? How can you walk forward in that when you are in a relationship with someone who hates you? How do you do that? How do you do that? So, what does that relationship look like? Now, we talk about this, this self-love and this pride that comes with self-love, right? Because, I mean, if you're looking at, let's go back. Let's look at children. Okay. So self-love is actually one of those things that we are trained out of as children, because if you look at children are born with this innate understanding of what they want, what they need, and what their limitations are, what their boundaries are, right? And we as parents and our grandparents, and, if you don't have children, your parents, your grandparents, your friends' parents, with the best intentions, have spent a lot of time training and teaching our children that those limitations, those boundaries, and those self-desires, those things that our children want for themselves, are selfish, and that they need to focus on others first and themselves last. And I am not saying that all of that is bad. I will be one of the first people to say that I do not want my children focused on themselves first and others last. I want them to be kind. I want them to have an awareness of what's going on around them. I want them to be aware of other people's needs. I want them to be aware of other people in general. But I don't want them to lose their innate understanding of what their boundaries are. I don't want them to lose their innate understanding of what their needs are, so much so that they would sacrifice what their needs are for the needs of someone else. And we talk a lot about millennials, right? Because this is the generation that's coming up, and how they really have no idea how hard life is, how they freak out when the Wi-Fi goes down, there's lots of funny jokes, right? Or that they have a very entitled attitude. And there is some of that, but underneath all of that, we also have this first generation to be overly exposed from birth to these images, these advertisements, these whole websites and businesses and social media that is specifically geared to affect the way that they think about themselves. We have a culture now that lives utterly disposable lives, from the food that we eat, the containers that we use, to the very clothes that we wear. We have a 52 season year in the clothing industry. So much that, the goal is to get people to buy brand new clothes every week so that these other clothes are just disposable. They're throwing them away. And that's, we've talked about that before too. But then we have all of this, and then we wonder where we get this generation of people who are not happy with their bodies, who find themselves giving so much to others that they have nothing left for themselves, that they can't seem to find enough balance to stay in relationships. Our divorce rate is super high. People aren't getting married anymore. And a generation that themselves feel disposable. And so this is where that whole relationship comes back into it, right? There is a healthiness that comes from knowing who you are and loving yourself. And we we don't even have to look at this as pride. I mean, pride doesn't even have to enter the picture, but confidence does. And the two are not the same. When you know who you are, believe you are beautiful, and love yourself, even knowing all of your flaws, right? Because how do we love other people? How do we live in relationship with other people? Because I can tell you, in a marriage of more than a year, I guess, you come to know another person's flaws pretty intimately. And you choose love. You choose to love them in spite of what they're doing. And sometimes you choose to love them over being right? But that doesn't sacrifice yourself in that situation. It's just a choice to love in spite of the flaws that you see in front of you. So if you can believe you're beautiful, if you can love yourself, even knowing all of your own flaws, it actually gives other people the freedom to see your beauty too. It gives them the freedom to love you, flaws and all. Because if you recognize your flaws and they recognize them, where's the offense when they actually call you out on one? Where's the offense? Yeah, you're right. I do have that flaw, and that's something I'm working on, and I need to get better at it. Thank you for helping me to see it. Thank you for helping me to be a teacher, or helping to be my teacher in this moment. I recognize that flaw. And you know what? It's there. It's part of me. It's part of what I'm doing to get it, how I'm trying to get better. So it gives people the freedom to love you through that too. But guess what? It also gives you the freedom to love others without the barrier that self-esteem or lack of self-love puts in place. You don't have to spend time thinking about what they think about you, because it doesn't matter. Loving yourself takes away all the fear of not being accepted or being judged by others. It's gone. Now, everything that we experience is interpreted in light of the culture that we live in. There are beliefs and perceptions that are ingrained as part of our DNA. And what's fascinating, and honestly, I've been reading some books about this, and I'm going to try and get you guys some interviews about this concept, because I think not only is it fascinating, but I think it's important for us to understand the power of the mind and how much things change based on what we see, what we hear, what we believe, that kind of thing. So I'm going to finish reading those books and try and get those people in to have on the podcast soon. But here's the good news. We are not limited by our culture, by our exposure, or by our DNA. In fact, there's pretty clear evidence that we can actually change the expression of our DNA by changing our environment and our mindset. And that's powerful. So sometimes we need something really practical, like that we can physically do to help us change our mindset. And I remember, this is all, of course, related to listening to your body, to being able to hear your body. Because if you don't love yourself, if you don't have a relationship with yourself where you're willing to hear yourself, then I can tell you to listen to your body all you want, and it's never going to happen. I mean, I was watching a documentary the other day, and something that stuck out to me was there was this woman who had just been diagnosed with MS, and people were telling her, "Oh, you need to listen to your body to find out what your body needs," and blah, blah, blah. And she looks at the camera and she says, "How do you even do that? How am I supposed to listen to my body when I can't even listen to my own family?" Right? So there's this disconnect, right? We can't, if we're sitting here and we can't even hear what our own loved ones are saying, who we put higher than ourselves, right? How can we listen to what we ourselves, what our own body is saying? So there are a couple of practical things we can do. to be able to find that relationship with ourselves, find that love for ourselves and for our bodies. And there are some actual physical things that we can do. And so we're going to start there. And then we can go into listening to what our body has to say. So if exposure is the thing that changes our perception, and this is going to sound crazy, right? We actually need to be looking in the mirror more and not less. So try this. This is like number one of the practical things you can do. Stand in front of a mirror after a shower or when you wake up in the morning and look at your body. Really look at your body. Instead of noticing the flaws, the stretch marks, the scars, remember, even airbrushed models have cellulite and marks, right? So look at yourself, and instead of noticing these things about yourself, the bumps and lumps, speak beauty out loud. Say to yourself in the mirror, you are beautiful. You are powerful. You are worthy. You are a world changer. And then say it to yourself. I am beautiful. I am powerful. I am worthy. I am a world changer. And, some people are not going to be able to do this initially, this I part. But if you can kind of disconnect for a minute and just speak to yourself in the mirror and start there until you're comfortable there, and then bring it back to the eyes. This is not something you're going to do once or twice. This is something you're going to need to do every single day until you believe it. And then do it regularly so that you can remember it. Because the more that you are exposed to the true beauty that you are, the more you will see it as beautiful. Now, another part of that dialogue that's really important to have with yourself is the gratitude side. And as you see every flaw or blemish in your body, right? Assign it to a memory or a recognition of life events that it speaks to. Even if your body has had or is struggling with illness, you are still alive today because this body has continued to breathe. It has continued to produce energy to give you life. It has continued to process nutrients and toxins to get them out. It has healed again and again and again. Speak to that body and thank it for what it has brought you through. And while this may seem a little bit like hooey initially, having a spoken appreciation for the things of really creation is actually a form of divine worship, right? It's honoring that life force that has served you and has allowed you to function in relationship with other people, with the divine source, with the world around you. It's honoring that. So speaking it out is also training your mind to hear truth, to hear that truth that you are beautiful, instead of the lie that modern cultural exposure has given you. Now, meditation is another one that is really helpful. And this goes back to, spending time with yourself, right? So your self-talk is one of them. And then how much time do you spend with yourself? And, this is one of those things where most of the time now, when we have time alone, we plug into an electronic. We have a phone, or we have a iPod or a laptop or a Kindle or something where we are really just plugging into some other thing. And so we're not spending that time alone anymore with our thoughts. And meditation can help with that. I mean, this is, we're talking about breathing, right? So if you're sitting and just focusing on your breath and listening to your breath. This is another opportunity to learn how to listen to your body. What is your body saying? Check in with your body as you listen to your breathing. Getting that breathing really focused, focusing inward, and hearing what your body is speaking to you. Because a lot of times we are trained so much to shut down the voice of our body that we don't hear it until it starts screaming. And some of that screaming is going to sound like cancer, or it's going to sound like alcoholism, or it's going to sound like liver disease. It's going to sound like autoimmune disease. This is our body saying, please, please, please listen to me. Please love me. Please take care of me. I'm here and I want to take care of you. And so there's this whole, screaming that our body is doing. And if we can find our way back to these quiet places of listening, quiet places of hearing ourselves, we can actually start to listen to our bodies. We can actually start to hear what our bodies are saying in that still quiet time instead of waiting until it starts screaming. So meditation is great because you're just focusing on your breathing, you're hearing, you're checking in, you're feeling the different parts of your body, what's hurting. And then the more that you do that, the more outside of this quiet time, you're able to tune in. If you eat something that disagrees with you, instead of just ignoring it or, just going, oh, well, that must be because of something else, or because it's cold outside, or because it's warm outside, or whatever it is, you can actually start going, you know what? I think that food that I just ate made my throat close up a little bit, or that food that I just ate gave me heartburn, or it made my stomach upset, or it really didn't, it made my joints ache a little bit. I wonder what that is. And so you start to really tune in. So there's this listening part that comes with it. And if you can't do meditation, another option is to do journaling, to do some sort of quiet time. I mean, if you're very spiritual, some of that quiet time can be in your spiritual practice. You spend that quiet time with yourself and with God or whatever. And then sometimes that, if you're not spiritual, you can do that quiet time really just with yourself. I mean, honestly, you can just spend that quiet time checking in. Let your mind race, but check in with yourself, figure out what you need, figure out, really start to assess what's going on in your life. Journaling is fantastic because you can, this is stuff you don't ever have to show to anybody else. And you can just spend 10, 15, 20 minutes a day just spilling, just get it all onto paper, get what you're feeling onto paper, figure out what's going on with you, figure out what's going on with your body, figure out what's going on with your mind, figure out what's going on with your life. Journaling can be really cathartic and really helpful to kind of guide you back into a place of purpose, into a place where you feel, good about yourself and helpful and useful and all of those wonderful things that can come with that. So that's kind of number 2, right? So the first one is being purposeful about speaking to yourself, and then spending time with yourself, and then obviously feeding yourself, which is always my go-to. Feeding yourself what actually feels good, not just what tastes good in the moment, because there are lots of foods that are really specifically fixed to taste amazing in that moment. But the more you get away from those kind of processed foods, those kind of chemically enhanced foods, and get into the real foods and foods in their most natural form, the more you appreciate those natural flavors, and the more you can incorporate those natural tasting foods into your diet. And then paying attention to how your body reacts to those different foods. Does it make you feel better? Does it make you feel worse? Pay attention. Listen. Listening is really, really important. Another one, and I loved this, and I don't know, actually, this is not my idea. It came from somewhere else, and I cannot remember my source, but I love this idea. And that is writing a love letter to yourself. And this kind of love letter is more like how it was when you first fell in love with someone, and you could look at them and you could just you could just see so many amazing things about them. And all you could see was just this, how wonderful they were, how they look and how they speak and what they say and how they treat other people and how, this part of their life is magnificent and how this part of their life is magnificent, and all of these wonderful things that you can see in the blooming of love, right? That's the kind of love letter to write to yourself. So you get out a piece of paper, you pick up a pen, and you basically channel someone who absolutely adores you. And you write a love letter to you as if it were coming from someone who absolutely adores you and can look at those things in your life and pull out those wonderful characteristics that are there. And believe me, no matter what you think about yourself, those characteristics are there. And this activity is really helpful because once you have this letter written, and it has to come from you, once this letter is written, you have it to be able to read it every day until you actually begin to believe the things that are written in it. Believing the things that are written in a love letter to yourself. And I love that so much. Now, there's something you can do, and this is really dependent on whether you have a significant other who is going to be supportive and kind and loving to you. This is a practical activity for people who have a loving and kind and supportive significant other. And what you can do is you can ask your significant other, your spouse, what they like about your body. And I got to tell you, and I know this applies to wives too, but I know so many men out there, so many husbands out there with wives who are embarrassed about their weight or their shape, and who are, every time they get out of bed, they're covering themselves, and the lights have to be off when they're intimate, and they're covered up when they run to the bathroom, and these poor husbands are just looking for a little glimpse of flesh. And when you are hiding your jiggles, he is looking at the lovely rounded shape. And this is an interesting point because since it really is about exposure, the more your spouse sees your shape, the more he or she will see it as beautiful. So think about that and take your clothes off more often. But most of all, be mindful of the images that you consume. Be mindful of the images that are consumed by your spouse or your significant other. Because if they are consuming images that are rampant in this culture that we live in, and those images do not match your body, and that's what they're seeing, then that's what they're going to see as beautiful. And then when they see your body, it's not going to be as beautiful to them because that's the image that they're seeing. So if you want your significant other, your spouse, to see your body as beautiful, they need to be exposed to it more than the images that are out there. Now, so being mindful of the images that you consume is as important for your body as the food you are consuming. Your mind is just as important as the food that is coming in. Okay? And then just one other kind of encapsulated idea is 2 questions that you can ask yourself when you're in the midst of all of this. So the first question comes from my really good friend, and she has really come so far in a loving relationship with herself and with her body. And one of the things that she says to people who she loves is, how can I support you? So if they're going through something, her question is not, or she doesn't say, oh, that's so sad. How can, whatever. She says, how can I support you? And this question is really great because it's very specific. It's, what are the things that I can do to support you? Instead of help you get out of this, or, it's a positive push, right? It's focusing on ways to make you better, to help you be better, to support you, not tear you down, not enable you, none of those things. How can I support you? And this is a question now she's asking herself in these moments of anguish, in these moments of, conundrum or whatever. The question that she then turns inward is, how can I support you? And that just opens up a whole different level of understanding or of seeking or of inspiration or of focus on where we need to be putting our energies, even for ourselves. How can I support you? And you turn it inward to yourself. So that's a fantastic question to ask yourself in the midst of going through things. And then the second question to ask yourself is this useful? And this question is really more focused on when you are hearing that tape in your head, those criticisms, the anguish, the feelings, the negative feelings that are coming up. These things, as they come into your brain, there's a question that can stop it in its tracks. And that question is this useful? Is this feeling useful to me? Is this criticism, the self-talk that I have, is this useful to me? And if it's not useful, it's not something that you need to keep. So it can be let go. Is this useful? Is this useful to me in my journey? Is this useful to me in my life? Is this useful to me in my stepping forward with purpose? Is this useful to me in how I parent my children? Is it useful in how I love my spouse? Is it useful in how I behave towards my parents? Is this useful to me? And how can I support me? So I think that covers most of it. So again, this is about listening to your body, listening to what your needs are, listening to where you are and where you are headed. And to be able to do that, you must be in relationship with yourself and love who you are at this very moment, because you are beautiful. You are worthy. You are powerful, and you are a world changer. So until next time, may you be blessed with good friends and learn to be a good friend to yourself, journeying to that place in your soul where there is love, warmth, and feeling. May this change you. May it transfigure what is negative, distant, or cold within your heart. May you be brought into real passion, kindness, and belonging. May you treasure your friends. May you be good to them, be there for them, and receive all the challenges, truth, and light you need. And may you also be that friend to yourself.
You've been listening to the Organic Crumbs podcast. Don't forget to leave a review on iTunes and make sure you subscribe. You can also find our show notes at organiccrumbs.com/podcast. And if you have a question for Tami, drop us a line at organiccrumbswellness@gmail.com. Material for this podcast is for general information only. It's not intended to offer personal medical advice, diagnose health problems, or be used for treatment purposes. It is not, nor is it intended to be, a substitute for medical care provided by a licensed and qualified health professional. Thanks for joining us for this week's show, and we look forward to seeing you next week.